Hi knitters, welcome to episode 102 of the Knitty McPurly podcast. I am your host, Devin Ventry. You can find me at KnittyMcPurly.com. I am Knitty McPurly on Instagram, and if you want to email me, I am Devin at KnittyMcPurly.com. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about knitting and other related topics. So please feel free to subscribe and join me every week on Sundays. I post a video and it's just kind of a conversational podcast. So here we go. It is super hot and rainy right now. What the heck? Also, can we just admire? So I did my nails yesterday. I kind of was aiming for like coffee color, but my husband was like, you look like you've been changing diapers. So anyway, it's hot and rainy, which is kind of disgusting. Yuck. I'm not a fan. But it is still November, and within a few days, it's going to be beautiful November weather again. Advent is 25 days away. What? It starts December 1st. If you don't have an Advent calendar yet and you want one, please head over to my website and order one. There are a very, very small number of them left, so you can go get one right now. The Mystery Knit Along starts along with the Advent calendar. That starts December 1st. There are 3 clues, and this year we are making accessories. So it's going to be super fun. I'm just saying. Okay, progress and shop news. So I decided that for my Black Friday shop update, I was going to go Monday to Monday, the Monday before Thanksgiving through Cyber Monday. But then I thought, with the podcast being on Sunday, it would be fun to start it earlier. So I'm going to start my shop update, and my Black Friday sale will start on Sunday, November 20th, probably around noon. That's about when I get the podcast up usually. So it'll all be happening around the same time. I have new colors of yarn. I'm working on those right now. That's really exciting because, the first couple are kind of easy, but then you have to say what's lacking, like what's missing here, and what color do I need to have all the time in terms of these are the colors I always have available. So I'm still working on getting those done, and that's been really fun. All across all 8 bases, I have 8 bases. 2 of them are non-superwash. The other 6 are superwash, and we're going to be talking about aspects of that today, which is going to be really cool. There will also be a discount code because it is a Black Friday sale, and I will have the Jennifer Yun scissor sleeves in beautiful, beautiful leather in a lovely green for the holidays, so that's something definitely not to miss. One decision I made as a shop owner, this was kind of a tough decision to make because shipping costs have gone up. It used to be that with my shipping rate, I could cover also the cost of the packaging materials, paper and, bags and boxes and labels and things like that. I used to be able to cover that in addition to the shipping cost. And it's been a while now that has not been covered. And we're now even at a point where I pay a lot more for shipping than what I charge you guys. And I really thought, do I want to raise my shipping costs? Because I want your business. I understand as a consumer myself that sometimes you're like, you've just priced me out. I can't even do business with you anymore because you're just too expensive. So I have decided not to increase my shipping costs. We're just going to suck it up and absorb the cost of, shipping for now. Hopefully I'll be able to do that forever. And then at some point down the line, if shipping becomes cheaper, I'll be able to drop my shipping costs once again. Right now, my flat rate for inside the US is $7. And I think I ship for 12 to Canada, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And then outside of that, it's just whatever it costs. Shopify generates a rate. But you're getting a good deal anyway. So there's that. There is free shipping at $200. I know that's a lot. But like I said, it costs me a lot to ship it too. So anyway, it's just a time that we're all kind of dealing with right now, but I'm trying to give as good a deal as I can. There will be a good discount over Black Friday week. So if you want to hold out for that, if you want a sweater quantity, I totally get it. Yeah. So I am working on the Lent calendar. Like I was working on the Advent calendar, the MCAL of which starts in 25 days. I was doing that in the summer. So right now I'm working on the Lent calendar and it is amazing. I'm so excited about it. I get excited. I know I'm early for all these things, but it's awesome. It's really fun. It's so fun and pretty and I love it. Anyway, the retreat, the Knitty McPurly retreat is in 81 days. People have been messaging me, asking me questions. If I don't get back to you right away, it's because a lot of times I have to find out the answer myself. Things like vendors charging sales tax in North Carolina, like I have to research that. I've got to figure out how to do that. I've never charged sales tax in another state, so I'm going to have to figure that out. But it's so exciting. Yay. It's really, it's coming together. The swag bags are coming together. It's very, very exciting. So there's not a lot that I can really talk about, along those lines, but I'm happy. I'm excited. It's good stuff. Moving right along to the word of the week. This week, we're going to talk about nylon because last week we talked about acrylic and I realized that while I don't have any acrylic yarn in my shop, I do have some merino nylon. I don't think I have any merino cashmere nylon. I do. My Aran weight has cashmere in it. Does it have nylon? I don't know, maybe. But I do have nylon in my shop. And so I was like, well, what's the difference between acrylic and nylon and like polyester? What is the difference between those things? So I jumped deeply into that rabbit hole this morning. I'm going to link a little video below that I came across. This is from NBC, I think. And it's like a little 10-minute video that describes the origin of nylon. And it shows a lot of cool pictures. So if you're interested in this beyond what I have to say, I'm going to explain it hopefully fairly well today. But if you want more detail on that, if you're really interested in that, go watch that little 10-minute video. It is super interesting. Basically, acrylic, polyester, nylon, spandex, all of these fibers come from petroleum. That is the basis of them, whether it is fossil fuels or coal or crude oil. That is the basis of all plastics and fibers that are made of plastic. Nylon was, I want to say nylon was the original, but I feel like the information on the internet can be a little biased depending on who you read. DuPont really wants to take credit for inventing plastics. But there are some websites that say that this dates back to the 19th century, as early as the 1890s in Germany. It seems like they were messing around with these chemicals and creating fibers. But DuPont officially, I guess, patented them in the 1930s. So DuPont is pretty much taking credit for it. And I don't want to make it sound like that's nefarious because I don't know. It's hard to know. Like when you look up the exact dates, there are the dates that the scientists started playing around. There are the official dates where they officially patented it. There are the dates that it was released to the public. Because like anything else, they would do it and then they'd be like, oh, well, this one melted when we tried to iron it. And this one we tried to dry clean and it dissolved. And so it took time for them to mess around with the different chemicals to create something that was going to work. So even the dates I'm giving are just, it's around that time. But nylon, according to many websites, came first, and that was invented in the 1930s by Wallace Carruthers. Nylon takes credit for being the first synthetic fabric. It is made from crude oil, which sounds kind of gross, but you think like acrylic comes from the word acroline, meaning that stuff that makes your eyes water that comes off of onions. Like none of this stuff has like a really like delightful origin. But whatever. So when Wallace Carruthers and his cronies over at DuPont was funding them because I think they were like, this seems like a good idea and let's just see where it goes. Like they didn't really know what Carruthers and these guys were going to come up with. So it's kind of amazing what they did come up with. And they were trying to mimic silk and spider silk. So the silkworm silk and the spider silk, because spider silk is like stronger than steel of that thickness. If you had steel at that thickness and spider silk is stronger. So they were like, how can we make something out of these chemicals that will be as strong as that? So when nylon was invented, nylon is a word that is derived from the English word cotton and rayon. And they came up with that word. DuPont came up with the word nylon. That's their word. And when it was full, like when they, from the time they were messing around and to the point where they were like, this is it, this is nylon, that fabric, as you know, became super popular in the 30s, and it replaced silk in a lot of ways because mainly with stockings in the 30s. Now that was the thing, the nylons, right? Everybody had the nylons. But then when World War II started, all of the nylon production went toward the war effort. And I'm going to be talking more about that. So this is what I learned from a PBS website. William Carruthers is a 32-year-old dude, and he is director of DuPont's research. He was an organic chemist with a specialization in polymers. And I learned way more about polymers today than I ever knew even existed. I mean, I guess I know that chemistry is this huge body of things that I don't really get. It's funny, my oldest daughter's taking chemistry. She's in 11th grade. She's taking chemistry this year. And I was telling her about when I was in 11th grade chemistry, and my teacher was Mrs. Shanks. She was amazing. I mean, she could explain things in a way that even I understood them. But anyway, polymers are basically, where they connect the paper clips together. And if you click on that little video below, it gives more of a, like a chemist's explanation of polymers. But basically, these molecules connect together and they can be stretched out into these long strands of plastic. And that's what a polymer is. So at this point, in the early 30s, I think this is like 1930, polymers are not understood very well. So DuPont puts Carruthers in charge of figuring this out. In 1931, DuPont started to manufacture neoprene, which they put in wetsuits and things like that. But the search was on for a synthetic fiber. In 1934, Carruthers had a promising development. This is from PBS that I'm reading now. He combined the chemicals hexamethylene diamine and adipic acid, and it created fibers, but they were weak, so he has to mess with it more and more. It also gives off water, so they have to have a way of removing the water, blah, blah, blah. So later on in the process, Carruthers draws out these fibers that are long, strong, and very elastic, and they call this nylon. They originally called it nylon 66 because the adipic acid and the hexamethylene diamine each contained 6 carbon atoms per molecule. Blah-de-blah-de-blah, molecules, polymers. This is exactly what DuPont had hoped for, and nylon was patented in 1935. So that's a hard date. Nylon was patented in 1935. It hits the markets in 1939, so right before the war. It's an instant hit, especially in hosiery, as I said. So pretty soon, the word nylons becomes synonymous with the word stockings. But Carruthers did not live to see the widespread application of his work in consumer goods such as toothbrushes, fishing lines, lingerie, surgical thread, parachutes, pipes, because he died in 1937. From the American Sewing Guild, I found out a lot more about these fibers, and this was written in a really easy to understand way, but it basically said, when heat and pressure are applied to fossil fuels, either petroleum, natural gas, or coal, magic happens. A plastic solution is formed because basically you have these monomers, which are these atoms that exist separately. And when they meet, they form these chains called polymers. And this is called polymerization. The plastic solution, somewhere between a solid and a liquid, is spun through tools with holes called spinnerets, just like a spider has. The spinnerets create a thread product that varies in thickness and is hollow or solid based on the size and shape of the spinneret holes. The solution spins through the spinnerets and exits into either air or water, where it solidifies into the acrylic fibers. These fibers are washed, dried, cut, and spun into thread, which can be woven into fabric. Now, when we're talking about acrylic, the pros of acrylic are that it is lightweight, it is warm, it dries quickly, and it's soft. It's also water repellent, and it can be produced a lot more cheaply than natural fibers, so it's less expensive. Sadly, but because it is water repellent, it also means that bacteria growth can occur in the fabric, which can cause odor and weaken it. It is also prone to static electricity and cling. It is flammable and it's hard to put out. That's why if you buy some clothing items at a store, it'll have a thing on there saying flammable, don't wear while sleeping or whatever. And wool is the opposite. Wool repels flame. It is hard even to light wool on fire. Acrylic does tend to pill, and it is not as durable. Also, when a polymer is being formed during that production process, if you have any contact with it, it will affect you like cyanide and can be a cancer hazard. So not the finished fiber, but at the point when the polymerization is happening. So presumably in these factories, they have that kind of closed off so that it doesn't affect people. It does not last long in the closet, like it is not as durable as wool. But when you toss it into a landfill, it takes 200 years to decompose, releasing the chemicals used into the environment. Now polyester, because I looked into these, I'm like, what is the difference between polyester, nylon, and acrylic? And the basic difference is that they begin with different chemicals, but it is the same process. It's polymerization, where the two different monomers meet together, and together they form a polymer that they can, extrude into a thread and do whatever with. Polyester fibers begin with either coal or petroleum, and by using air and water, they do that same polymerization process. Now, polyester is the most common polymer that is spun into fiber, and that uses nearly 70 million barrels of oil each year. Isn't that interesting? Who knew? Who knew? Nylon is the second most used, right behind polyester. So it was developed under the umbrella of DuPont over an 11-year time span. Now this says it was announced as viable in 1938. The PBS article said 1939, but around that time. The use of nylon in clothing emerged out of a search for alternatives to silk for parachutes in World War II, because Japan is where we got our silk, and we were not working together with Japan during World War II. So nylon came along right in 1939 at a really good time because we needed parachutes. So the parachutes that were made for World War II were made of nylon. It kind of worked out. And that is super interesting. So, so when the war started, cotton constituted more than 80% of the fabric used in the United States, and everything else was wool. But by 1945, just a short 6 years later, synthetic fibers like nylon supplied around 25% of the textile market share. Interesting. Like, that's just really interesting. So who knew? And even the US flag on the moon is made of nylon, unless you're one of those people who think that the moon landing is fake. It's so funny. I just heard about that recently, like that theory that the moon landing was fake. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, Was it fake? I don't know if it was or not. But if it was real, the one on the moon is made of nylon. So interesting. So last week, our topic of the week, I'm just going to go over some of your comments from last week about acrylic because lots of you use acrylic yarn. I was really surprised. I almost never use it. Even before I began dyeing my own yarn, I think it's because when I first started knitting, I only had like Michael's yarn, and most of the yarn at Michael's has some form of acrylic in it, even if it's a wool acrylic blend or a cotton acrylic blend. They do have 100% cotton at Michael's or Hobby Lobby or Joann's or wherever you're going, any kind of craft store. I started out my knitting there, and I guess I just felt like I was leveling up, there was kind of, when I started knitting in 2012, there was kind of a stigma against acrylic, like it was just kind of frowned upon or, looked down on. And I started gravitating toward natural fibers. Now that said, I just like natural fibers. And it's funny, I ran into some people when I was mailing out all of my advent calendars, because I'm wheeling these giant carts of packages into UPS. And so people say, what are you mailing? And so I get into these conversations with people. And anyway, when I was talking to people, they'd say, oh, do you have sheep? And I'd say, nope. And they'd say, do you dye with natural elements? And I would say, nope. I mean, I'm not that granola about it, I guess, but I do love a good superwash. I love professional acid dyes. That's what I used to dye with. But I do love a natural fiber. I don't know, it just is awesome. I guess I feel like wool is so great. Wool can hold like 30% of its weight in water, and it doesn't even feel wet. Like God designed this for these sheep to be warm and comfortable. And, who are we and William Carruthers to come along and say, and not that nylon doesn't have its uses, it certainly does. I talked about science fair last year when my oldest daughter did science fair, but this year my middle daughter is going to do science fair, and she is testing parachute material. And I was thinking about that when I was reading this, thinking, gosh, I got to tell her about this stuff because, nylon has its place, and it really fortuitously came along in 1939, right when we really needed it. But I do like wool. I do love wool. And some of you mentioned in your comments that you love alpaca. I love alpaca too. And right where I live, there are a couple of alpaca farms around me. I would love to get some alpaca yarn and have that in my shop. I would love that. I would love to work with more alpaca. I feel like it had a boom maybe 10 years ago, but I feel like it's a little bit less now. It's harder to find. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But a lot of people said that acrylic is affordable, and you really like that. I like that too. That's great. You mentioned prayer shawls, baby stuff, stuff for kids, blankets, toys. A lovely podcast watcher named Florence. Hi, Florence. She mentioned making pot holders out of acrylic, which she's like, I know that's controversial. She's like, only once did it melt when she was pulling something out. I am afraid to use handmade pot holders in general. Like even if they're made of wool, they have to be really dense. I do have one that someone made for me that I use as like a trivet, under a pot. But when I'm pulling it out of there, I want to be sure I am not going to be burned because I don't want to drop that thing and have that everywhere. So, but I am impressed that you guys will use a handmade pot holder for that purpose. That's kind of awesome. But acrylic is not as durable. It's both not as durable and it takes longer to decompose, which seems like those two things shouldn't go together. But also it pills. Another tip that I got from you guys is that Hobby Lobby's cotton, and this was from Florence, but a couple of you mentioned it. Hobby Lobby's cotton called I Love This Cotton might be a little easier on your hands. So that's a possibility. I will have to try that. And all of your comments and all of this led me down a very small rabbit hole. I didn't dive deep into this one about wool allergies. This is controversial because some people who feel that they have a wool allergy, they stand by it and they are like, I have a wool allergy and nobody is telling me that I don't have one. But there is a large body of evidence that says that that is fiction, that the wool allergy, the wool is not what you're allergic to. This group of people, and I do not take a stand because I really don't know. People say, my skin itches, I sneeze, my eyes water, I turn red. Like, these are allergy symptoms, right? So there's one for team allergy. But for team, studies and science, they're like, wool is basically like hair. Like it's not an allergen. So they suggest that what you're actually allergic to is the lanolin in the wool, or perhaps something the wool has been treated with or dyed with or blended with. Or if the fibers are coarse and they kind of, like if this is the strand of wool and they have these smaller pieces that stick out, that could be bothering you, but that's not causing your nose to run and your eyes to water. So I really don't know. I don't have an opinion, but I bet you do, unless you're like me and it just doesn't affect you. But if you have a wool allergy, then I feel you. Like, I get it. You're like, I cannot use it. I cannot wear it. But I did read this about this topic. It said, parents may shy away from using wool on their children because they have heard that it's an allergen. However, there have been studies. Studies have found that superfine merino actually irritates children's skin less than cotton. So I don't know. I'm not sure what's causing the problem. 2 other studies have found that a superfine merino caused 0 reactions among children and any other age group. So again, you don't know in the study if it was a totally virgin wool with no treatment of any kind, with all the lanolin removed. You don't know. So I think we'll have to say the jury is out. Are we okay with saying that the jury's out? The people who have a wool allergy, obviously something is causing your difficulty, but I don't know what it is. Okay, moving right along to knitting fantasies. So this week I came across a website called knittingknowledge.com. And this website said something that I found to be both very true and very helpful. It said, finding your next knitting project shouldn't be difficult. Unfortunately, most knitting websites are full of outdated patterns and thousands of old and disorganized designs. In an effort to fix this, we have curated the best knitting patterns out there and categorize them by style, skill level, and silhouette. You'll find, so they have all these different categories. This is knittingknowledge.com. I'll put a link below. And they have a bunch of different categories, but as I was searching, I found knitted pants. Yes, knitted pants. So the below the waist category in knitwear is typically just socks, right? Maybe some taller socks sometimes, maybe some leg warmers, possibly tights, but pants, you don't see a lot of knitted pants. So I went through their list and I picked out 2, although there was only one that looked to me like I would actually make them. And they are the 003 trousers from Rowan. This is a pattern by Lisa Richardson, and it is knit in a Rowan alpaca soft DK. So when I first read that, I was kind of like, alpaca for pants? Because alpaca has a tendency to stretch. So I was like, that's a weird choice. But then I found that Rowan's alpaca soft DK is 70% wool and only 30% alpaca. Now, to make this pair of pants, you would need 14 balls of this yarn, and that's gonna come in at about $200. So I don't know. I mean, I think if I were gonna make this pair of pants, what would I do? I would probably use my own yarn because this yarn comes in 50-gram balls. So there's only 136 yards per ball, and you need 14 of them. So if you had a 100-gram skein, you'd probably need ballpark 7. But perhaps an acrylic yarn or a wool acrylic blend might be good. That would make the machine washable too. Some of you mentioned in your comments that acrylic grows in the wash, even in the dryer. So I feel like maybe even like a 50-50 wool acrylic would have a lot of good qualities that wool has while also being, machine washable and whatnot. So, but this pair of pants, they look pretty cute. I mean, they're styled in a really cute way in the picture. But in this list, there's a bunch of them that have ribbing. There's a bunch in stockinette, lots of different silhouettes, lots of different styles. Now, the second pattern that I picked are called the Juiced Pants. This is a Lion brand pattern that is free, and Lion brand recommends their yarn called Jeans yarn, and I didn't look to see exactly what the fiber content of that was, but if I had to guess, it definitely has some acrylic in it. That's my guess. This is a free pattern. It is an easy level, probably because there's not a lot of fittedness to it. It looks like there's a drawstring at the top, so they just have to be bigger than you are, and then you can, cinch them in with the drawstring, and that would take care of a lot of gauge issues or knitting issues or whatever. It is an easy level. They put it at a level 2, which is easy, and it comes in 5 sizes. So I don't know if I would take my chances with that one. I think I would probably look it up on Ravelry, which I have not done, but I would want to see if other people had knit them and see what their comments were before I took those on. For some, I feel, Lisa Richardson is a known quantity. Rowan is a known quantity. I think I would choose that pair first if I were going to knit a pair of pants, but now I kind of want to, sort of. It's a fantasy. We don't actually have to do it. Okay, so here's what happened. Now, this So Here's What Happened was sent to me at the end of September, and then I forgot about it. So this is from Olia. Olia, I'm so sorry that I told you I was going to be presenting this at the beginning of October, and it slipped through the cracks, so I apologize. Here it is. Olia wrote me a message saying, I'm a recent podcast viewer from the last few months. It took me a while to find you. I've been enjoying your podcast and wanted to share this touching story that I recently read in a book. So this is a story from a book, and Olia said she highly recommends it. The book is called Timeless Stories, God's Incredible Work in the Lives of Inspiring Christians by Vance Christie. And that's a picture that Olia sent me, but she said it's a really good book. She said, the story is knitting related, but the main point is about God answering a prayer of a child, even down to the smallest detail. I just couldn't stop thinking about it in the last couple of weeks. Clearly, I felt I had to share it with you, and if you feel led, with your audience. So here it is. So, and Olia is also a homeschooling mom, so I get it, girlfriend. Whew, homeschooling is hard. Anytime you ask me about homeschooling, I'm probably going to first say homeschooling is hard. It's great though. It's great, but it's hard. Okay. So this is the story from the book. It says, as a very young child, Abigail Townsend, whose father, John, was George Mueller's right-hand man in his Sunday school ministry to children, was visiting Mueller's home. I'm not sure. It looks like Muller with an umlaut. I'm going to say Mueller. I don't exactly know. Mueller, I guess, would be like the German. Presently, she declared, I wish God would answer my prayers like he does yours, George Mueller. He will, Mueller assured her. Taking her on his knee, he quoted God's promise. What things soever ye desire when ye pray, believe that you receive them and you shall have them, which is from Mark chapter 11, verse 24. And then he explained the meaning of the verse. Then he asked, now, Abby, what is it you want to ask God for? Some wool, she responded. Girl after my own heart. Clasping her hands to pray, Mueller instructed her to repeat what he said. Please, God, send Abby some wool. Please, God, send Abby some wool, she repeated in simple faith. Then she jumped down to go play, assured that the wool would come. Suddenly, the thought came to her that God did not know what kind of wool she wanted, so she ran back to Mueller and told him she wanted to pray again. This time, he responded, "Not now, dear, I'm busy." "I get it." "But I forgot to tell Dodd the color I want," she persisted. Won over, Mueller again lifted her onto his knee and said, "That's right. Be definite, my child. Now tell God what you want." "Please, Dodd, send it variegated," petitioned Abigail, who possessed a large vocabulary, but could not pronounce her V's or G's for that matter. The next day, she was overjoyed to receive a package of variegated wool from her Sunday school teacher. The teacher, who was aware of Abigail's interest in knitting, knew her birthday was coming soon, although she was uncertain of the exact date. God providentially allowed the package to arrive not on her birthday, but on just the right day to assure this child that he hears and answers specific prayers. That's awesome. I love that. That's a great story. Very sweet. Children are just so that way. They're so sweet and innocent, and they're like, okay, here it is, God. And that's what it means. Like, we're supposed to approach God like a little child. You say your prayer, and then you just walk away assured that God's going to hook you up. God is awesome. I love him. Thank you so much for joining me for this week. This is a weekly podcast. I'm here every Sunday. If you are new to the podcast, you can go back and watch the previous ones. They're all pretty much the same in terms of layout. I need a knitting story for next week. I do not have one, so send me your knitting story. I have people message me a lot and say, I want to send you my story, but I'm afraid to, or I need to sit down and type it out. Sit down and type it out. Do a video, whatever you want to do, send it to me, because this is the most popular part of the podcast. Everyone loves it. So please send me your knitting story so that I can share it next week. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, knitters.